Okay, so the topic for today is an introduction to transformations. Okay, so this is something that you've probably seen in some respect earlier. In elementary and middle school, we tend to call these slides, flips, and turns. That's like the old school name for them. So this entire unit is going to be about how do you move things around within space, okay? So we got to build up a little bit. We have to start with the idea of a mapping. Okay, and a mapping is basically a rule. And it's a rule that tells you how to take a point, P, and move it to another point. We'll call that P prime. Okay, and the original point we're going to call a pre-image, and the point that it maps to we're going to call an image. So the mapping, specifically a geometric mapping, is a rule for how to move one point to another. So this rule is what we call the mapping. Now, there's a particular type of mapping that are called one-to-one mappings. Okay, so in the original mapping, P has to go to some other point, P prime. Now, here's the thing. We have a one-to-one mapping if every single image came from a specific pre-image. So the only thing that maps to, so let's call the mapping M, the only thing that maps P to P prime is, the only thing that M maps to P prime is P. So basically I could undo the mapping. I would know that if I used this mapping to go from P to P prime, then the only way I can go back from P prime is through P. And if I have that, I have what is called a one-to-one mapping. Okay, so this topic today, though, is on transformations. And what a transformation is let's say I have some geometric figure. And let's call it a triangle, A, B, C. And I have some mapping. Okay, so let's say my rule for mapping says if I have line M, I'm going to reflect the points across M. So that's my rule. Take the points that are in the figure and reflect them across. So B is going to go to B prime, C is going to go to C prime, A is going to go to A prime. Okay, so there I've used a rule, and I have now mapped all the points in one figure to the points in a new figure. When I do that, this is called a transformation. Okay, so basically there's a bunch of different ways of doing transformations. This one is what's called a reflection, right? So we'll get into that later on. But this one's called a reflection, and this is what you would typically call a flip. Other things that can happen is you can have slides, you could have turns. We're going to call those translations and rotations. And you can actually take things and make them bigger or smaller using a mapping. That's also a type of transformation called a dilation. But the idea is that you're taking a set of points, you're using a rule, in this case it said reflected over the line, and you're getting a new set of points. If you do that, that's what's called a transformation. Okay, so there's also a very specific form of a transformation, and this is what's called an isometry. Okay, so this comes from two words, iso and metry. Iso means same, and metry means measure. Okay, so what measures the same? Alright, so if I have a line segment, call it AB, and I perform some sort of transformation on it, so I use some rule. So let's say the rule says move everything in this direction. Okay, so now I have it moved to A prime, B prime. So this type of transformation is a slide. I slid it from here to here. Sometimes we call that a translation. But here's what's happening. If you look at the image, the pre-image rather, and the image, so this here is the image, right? So if I go from the pre-image to the image, the pre-image being the segment AB to the segment A prime, B prime, and the length of the segments has stayed the same. So AB, A prime, B prime, right? If the length of all the segments in the figure have stayed the same, then we call this an isometry. Okay, so an isometry is a type of transformation where the length of all the segments, same measure, stays the same. Okay, so let's kind of summarize what we did here. You have a big group of things which is called a mapping, which moves a point to a point, right? If I have a one-to-one mapping, I can go backwards between that. So that would be 1 to 1. If I have a one-to-one mapping where I take a figure to a figure, this is what is called a transformation. And in this course, we're going to see 4 types of transformations. You're going to see basically what is called a reflection. You know it as a slide, a translation. Sorry, reflection is a flip, not a slide. A flip, a translation. That one is a slide, a rotation, which is a turn, and ultimately a dilation, which is something we're not going to see in this unit, but we'll see in the unit later on, which is basically doing something that either magnifies or shrinks. So it's like magnifying or shrinking something. Okay, if this happens, and these 3 do this, this one does not, you get, in all of the side lengths of something, all the segment lengths are the same, you get an isometry. Okay, so key terms from today: transformation, isometry, mapping. And these are the 3 key terms that we are going to use from this section. Alright, thank you.